When game masters decide to run adventure modules such as Curse of Strahd or Tome of Annihilation for their groups, I think it's easy for us to scrap the notion of incorporating character backstories into the game because we may not be sure how to actually do it. So today we're going to discuss 3 different ways you can build the backstories of your players' characters into the game when you're running a pre-made module or adventure path. We'll go over the pros and cons of each approach and touch on what types of groups each might be best for. Because, not everything works for everyone. And as a reminder, just because you're using an adventure module or adventure path, that doesn't mean it includes everything that should be included in the game. As a game master, you are free, encouraged even, to adjust things in the module as you see fit to customize it for the tastes and style of both you and your players. And that includes doing so to include backstory elements into the game. Now, if you're wondering why you should include PC backstory elements in your game, I answered that question in another video on my channel titled How to Use Character Backstories in D&D. So you can check that video out after this one if you'd like. Okay, here we go. 3 ways to use backstories in pre-made adventure modules. Number 1. Place backstory elements into a module's existing adventures. This method involves taking elements from a PC backstory and dropping them into parts of the adventure module that already exist. You're not creating new encounters, side quests, or adventures. You're just adding something small to the game that touches on a backstory. For example, if a character was searching for a magical sword their mentor bequeathed to them, but it was stolen by a thief, they might just happen upon it in the middle of one of the adventures in the module. As a GM, you drag and drop that sword, that backstory element, into the game. Of course, you want there to be some reason and rationale for it as well, but you are essentially just fitting in a backstory element somewhere the group would go as part of the module. As another example, in my Curse of Strahd game, I had Strahd appealing to PC's individual desires and goals, often based on their backstory, to tempt them to fall from grace. For instance, Strahd was offering Joe's dwarf character a piece of the kingdom, offering Kevin's character more power, and offering to allow Alex's character to just leave. Okay, here are the pros of this approach. First of all, it requires minimal effort for the game master, besides the creativity factor, of course. And there's usually minimal impact to the nuts and bolts of the adventures in the module, and the game master doesn't have to adjust things that much. You can basically just run the module as is for all intents and purposes. And here are the cons, the drawbacks. Because you're limiting the scope of the backstory elements placement in the game, the scope of what you can draw from and use from the backstory might be limited. There's also less reward for the players because you're only incorporating backstory elements a little bit. This can also feel more staged for the players as well. For instance, in the example of the magic sword from the backstory, isn't it just kind of odd that it just happens to be in Barovia? Though it doesn't have to feel that way. The way that I wove the backstories and motivations into Curse of Strahd was more organic, I feel, but I was still limited in what I could do because of that. Alright, the kind of groups this is good for. If you have players that aren't as much into role-playing or exploring their characters' backstories, motivations, and goals, and just want to play through the adventures in the module, this is probably the best approach for you. New game masters who don't feel comfortable making lots of adjustments and just want to run a module mostly as is will also find this approach pretty darn good. And there is nothing wrong with that either, by the way, a new game master not feeling comfortable making a bunch of adjustments, because we've all been there. Okay, and now a message from the sponsor of today's sleazy plug, me. Hi, Barbarian here. Are you a busy dungeon master looking for 5e resources that you can use in your games? Maybe you want to reduce your prep time a tad, or you're just tired of your brain overheating because, creativity is hard. Either way, Lair magazine is exactly what you need. Each monthly issue contains 2 to 3 5e adventures, complete with digital maps for online play, and you'll get other GM resources such as puzzles, traps, magic items, monsters, bacon, sausage, ham, cheese, and more. I don't know if you actually get all that type of food, but wow, that sure would be delicious. Anyway, you can get all this and lots of other cool benefits by becoming a DM Lair patron at the link below. You will instantly get access to 2 issues of Lair magazine, and then every month you get a new issue. Act now before time runs out. Actually, I'm pretty sure you can become a patron whenever you want. There's not like a time limit or anything. So yeah, link down below. Number 2. Place backstory elements into new short-form content. such as encounters. Okay, this technique involves a bit more effort, as the Game Master creates something new to be added to the game, often a quick encounter or super short side quest, but nothing too elaborate that has to do with the player's backstory. For instance, in my Curse of Strahd game, Alex's character, a monk, had another monk from the same monastery arrive, having been sent to find him, and I also offered that the other monk could become a sidekick for the group if they wanted to have him adventure with them, but they declined that offer and didn't want him to go along. Another game that I was running, my Hand of Light group, which wasn't a module, but this still serves as an example of this way of incorporating character backstories. I had a player named Ben who had a paladin who had a very black past, and he had done some really horrible things that had resulted in some of the soldiers that he served with being murdered. And then these soldiers' restless spirits came back as revenants that tracked him down and confronted him in an encounter that I set up during our normal game. And there was a confrontation, and they had to fight these revenants and ultimately defeat them. But it was a really cool moment in the game, and it didn't take that long. I think we spent maybe an hour with the encounter and the combat that followed, but I distinctly remember that after the game, Ben was like, "Luke, thank you so much for the backstory element. That was super cool." Okay, what are the pros for this? Well, first of all, you have medium effort for the Game Master. It's not small, but it's not a lot either. And with that, you also have medium reward for the players. They're gonna see good pieces of their backstory show up in the game. This method also feels intentional, but it's a little less staged in my opinion. I mean, they're always gonna know that there's a man behind the curtain, but I feel like it's less noticeable maybe. Also, this approach doesn't draw out the module, make it take longer than it would otherwise take by causing characters to level up outside of module content. All right, the drawbacks of this approach, there really aren't that many. This is kind of the middle of the road approach. You get some good benefits without a whole lot of drawbacks. All right, the kinds of groups this is good for. First of all, if you have a game master with a bit more experience or a new game master who isn't afraid to try new things out and work through challenges or setbacks, then this is going to be a good thing to do. Also, if you have groups of players who really want to explore their backstory and or really get a kick out of seeing their backstory elements come into play, but are still very much interested in the adventures in the module too, then this might be the way to go. By the way, if you're finding the information in this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Let us know how you incorporate character backstories into pre-made adventure modules. Number 3, place backstory elements into new long-form content, such as adventures. This technique involves going all out, usually creating entire side quests and adventures related to PC backstories that your players might go on. Now, I don't run a ton of modules, so I'm not sure I've actually ever created an adventure based on a backstory that I've added to a module, but I've certainly created adventures based on backstories, and I've certainly added brand new adventures to modules. I'll give you an example of each. The trick is just to blend the two ideas together. First, in my Sword Coast Guard game, Trevor's character Dalinar used to be part of a thieves guild called the Velvet Fists, so I pulled that information out of his backstory and literally created an entire adventure for the group to go on that involved the Velvet Fists. Another example, in my Curse of Strahd game, the group wanted to meet with the Mad Mage, who was wandering Barovia, but I wanted to have them go into an actual wizard's tower instead of just encountering him as it was described in the module. So I created an entire adventure for them, the Tower of the Mad Wizard, and just plugged it into the module. By the way, both of those adventures I just described are available on the DM Lair store if you'd like to check them out. I'll throw some links down below. All right, the big benefit of this approach is that there's high reward for players. They're gonna see a lot of their backstories, and it's gonna take up a good chunk of the game because you're going on adventures based on the backstories. These are adventures that you create and that you inject into the module that's going to come between the adventures that are actually in the module. This is still going to feel intentional because your players are going to know that you're putting this stuff in and that it's not happenstance, but it's going to feel less staged, I feel, than approach number 1. Okay, the cons for this one. Obviously, if you're creating entire new adventures, this is high effort for the game master. Although, I must say, many game masters love creating adventures. I know I do, so this could really be a pro in your book. It also draws out the module, and you're going to need to adjust the difficulty of the module adventures because the characters are going to be leveling up more often since you're adding in so much extra content. You could ostensibly take a module that only goes to level 10 and extend it out to 15 or 18 just by injecting adventures in it that are based upon your character's backstories. It might not be a bad thing. Okay, the kinds of groups this is best for. I feel like this is probably best for experienced game masters who know how to adjust modules and increase the level of adventures, because you're definitely going to have to do this. Now, that said, new game masters could certainly do this as well. Just be aware that you may find yourself in over your head a little bit, and you're going to need to work through some unfamiliar challenges. But if you're okay with that and up for some fun, go for it. This is also really good for groups with players who love role-playing their PC's motivations and desires, and who want to explore elements from their backstories, even if it means it will take longer, sometimes considerably longer, to finish the module. They still want to play the module, but they're very much okay with big detours because they're just as fun. Click on the screen right here to learn more about using character backstories in RPGs, or to become a DM Lair patron, get an issue of Lair magazine every month, and play D&D with me. And until next time, I have nothing clever to say, just end.